Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Diversity and Inclusion Dialogue Series session on Resilience, Patience, and Focus, a Ramadan Experience. This event is presented in partnership between the UC Davis Office for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Campus Community Book Project. My name is Megan Macklin, and I serve as a Program Manager in the Office of Campus Community Relations. Thanks so much for joining us today. To begin, a couple of housekeeping items for our virtual event. Today's event features live captioning from Otter Live Notes. To access the transcript, click on the red live icon on the top left of your Zoom screen. You also can access the live stream by navigating to the link that we'll put into chat. Today's event is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Book Project website. If folks feel comfortable doing so, we encourage you to turn on your video. It's great, especially for our panelists, to see faces. And after today's presentations, our speakers will take questions. You are invited to ask questions or share comments in the chat at any point during the event. The UC Davis Diversity and Inclusion Dialogue Series, sponsored by the Office for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, is a monthly series open to faculty, staff, students, and community members to learn about and discuss issues critical to cultural humility, health equity, and diversity and inclusion. The series strives towards building relationships through increased understanding and trust, which helps to foster an inclusive workplace. For more information and other resources, please refer to the DNI Dialogue Series website. The UC Davis Campus Community Book Project promotes dialogue and builds community by encouraging diverse members of the campus and surrounding communities to read the same book and attend related events. The Book Project, a signature initiative out of the Office of Campus Community Relations since 2002, advances the mission to improve both the campus climate and community relations, to foster diversity, and to promote equity and inclusiveness. Currently, the Book Project is in its 19th year, and we are focusing on the theme of mental health. Our featured book is graphic memoir Marbles, Mania, Depression, Michelangelo, and Me by Ellen Forney. Our theme and selection have been supported by a year-long program of events. For more information, you can visit our website where you can find up-to-date event information, registration links, and other resources. On the Book Project website, you also can find information on our May 2021 series in recognition of Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This series, in partnership with the Office for Health Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the UC Davis Health Asian Pacific American System-Wide Alliance, focuses on resilience, mental health, and well-being for the AAPI community. Finally, the Book Project welcomes your involvement, students, staff, faculty, and community members, in selecting our featured title and in planning our annual program. If you are interested in getting involved with the Book Project, please send us an email, or you can refer to the Book Project website for more information. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andrew Lee, Assistant Professor in the Division of Plastic Surgery, who will lead today's event. Dr. Lee, please take it away.
Hey, thanks so much, Megan, and thanks so much, Koban and Sunny, and to the Office of Student Resident Diversity and also the Office of Health Equity and Diversity and Inclusion for having this opportunity for us to share this holiday. I've been working with Riad, Morrar, and Khadija Soufi, who are our two stellar MS1 medical students here at UC Davis, and they've prepared this this slide deck to kind of help introduce this holiday that we celebrate, its meaning, and also the kind of ramifications of it, or should I say the kind of the nuances of celebrating the holiday within the healthcare context. So with that being said, I'll have Riad kind of start the slide deck for us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with the presentation. We're going to be talking about Ramadan in the healthcare setting. And as Dr. Lee mentioned, it's just a collaborative effort for us to just have this dialogue as well, too. Okay. Okay, so to get us started, we just want to preface and give everyone some background information. Ramadan is a Muslim holiday and time of the year that lasts for 1 month. So we want to just give a little background context into what is Islam. And what it is, it's finding peace through surrendering to God. It's a way of life, and it's a religion. It's an Abrahamic religion, and it's a monotheistic religion. That means that we do believe in one God as Muslims. And you might often hear when we pray, we use the word Allah, and that means one God in the Arabic language as well. As I mentioned, because it's an Abrahamic religion that does share a lot of the tenets of faith with Judaism, Christianity, and these trace back to Prophet Abraham. Peace and blessings be upon him. So we say, who are Muslims and what is technically a Muslim by definition? And so a Muslim is someone who follows Islam and who follows the tenets of the faith and carries out the practices of Islam. The literal meaning is one that surrenders to God, and that's what the word Islam comes from. It means surrenderance, to surrender. And to put into context, there's about 1.6 billion Muslims in the world of a population of about 7.8 billion people on this planet. And I'll carry on with some more demographic information. So this is a question that I have for the audience, and it's, which geographical region contains the highest percentage of Muslims worldwide? Okay, I see some of the answers are coming in. Okay, I think the answers might have reset. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and continue. Can you see the results on the screen? I believe I have to. You can? Okay.
No.
No? What about now?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so as we see, some of our audience members and some of us, we see some people think that it's Europe or the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa or Asia Pacific. And so we'll carry on to the results and we'll see that the Asia Pacific is actually the largest proportion, that holds a larger proportion of Muslims worldwide. And it's nearly 62% of Muslims worldwide. And you can see that on this map. As you see, one of the lower areas is Latin American and the Caribbean, and North America is also doesn't have as much either. And Middle Eastern and North Africans only make up about 20% of Muslims worldwide. And that's often a misconception that some people do have. And in the Asia Pacific countries, Indonesia is actually the highest proportion of Muslims, and I believe one of the highest contributors in terms of population demographics for Muslims worldwide. And it is the second largest religion in the world. Okay, so in terms of US Muslims, we talked about there's only, some estimates are 2 to 7 million Muslims worldwide, and that's because we don't have a religious consensus in terms of narrowing down how many Muslims there are. But in terms of estimates and what we see, we can see on the top right that about 70% of the Muslims are US citizens and would be immigrants, while as 47% would be US immigrants as well. And we see on the bottom right, in terms of the percentage of who attends worship at their local mosque or church, and we see that 47% of US Muslims do, compared to 45% of US Christians. So it's pretty much pretty similar in terms of different religions, comparing the two and overall what their level of service is to their respective church. And we see the day-to-day activities that Muslims engage in terms of the general public on the left, and we see Muslims in the general public are pretty comparable in terms of how much TV they watch. In terms of use of social networking, it seems that Muslims seem to be just a little bit higher, but when it comes to pro sports, we're about the same. Video games is also the same, and displaying the American flag is just a little bit lower as well, but pretty comparable in terms of the general public and Muslims when you compare the two. As we continue on, we'll just talk about a little bit more about US Muslim demographics, and for education and income, pretty similar to the general US population, but because of immigration, there seems to be a lesser average in terms of overall age for Muslims overall. And these are just some data points from Pew Research, where they do a wonderful job of kind of gathering the data, compiling it, and estimating to make sure that there's a somewhat correct representation of the data for Muslims. And so going back to the original discussion that we were going to have in terms of Islam and what the declaration of faith and prayer and charity and fasting and pilgrimage and what are these? So Islam is defined by these 5 pillars. And so to declare yourself that you're a Muslim by taking something called the Shahada, where you believe that there's one God and Prophet Muhammad is the messenger. That's what allows you to enter the folds of Islam. The second pillar would be prayer, the third charity, the fourth fasting, and of course, which is the discussion that we're going to have today. And the fifth would be the pilgrimage. And that might be something that you see on the media where people go to Mecca and they go to Hajj. And so that's what that is. So in terms of fasting, it is the fourth pillar of Islam. And that has to do with Ramadan. And that's ultimately what today's discussion is about. And so what is Ramadan? Ultimately, it lasts for 1 month, as I mentioned earlier. We would consider it a yearly cleansing of the body and the soul. It is 29 to 30 days, and that's because it's based off the lunar calendar, whereas the calendar that we use with January, February, all the way up until December is based on the solar calendar. And so for Ramadan, we do fast from dawn to dusk. And so the days can range anywhere from 14 hours now to maybe 16 hours in the summer. And sometimes in the winter, it would be much less, maybe 10, 11 hours. And this map right here illustrates the differences in times that people do fast throughout the day in different parts of the world. And then again, for Ramadan, what do we abstain from as we're fasting? We abstain from food, from water, from sexual intimacy, injections, and we'll get into that later on in terms of nutritional and things along those lines. Nasal drops and medications. So as healthcare providers and as people that work in the healthcare field, these are things that we might need to keep in mind in regards when we know that people around us may be observing Ramadan. And so we're gonna go ahead and bring up some discussion questions. And I believe Khadija might be the first one on this one.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take the lead. My name is Khadija. I'm one of the MS1s at UC Davis. And the first question we wanted to talk a little bit with all of you today is, as healthcare providers, we work with a lot of different patient demographics. We work with a lot of different people. And if you had a Muslim patient coming into you and they wanted to fast for Ramadan, what are things that you should consider? What do you want to be aware of? You can feel free to choose questions in the poll and we'll discuss them further. Okay, so I think, can everyone see the poll results right now? All right, great. So I think a lot of people ended up choosing all of the above. And medication, timing, and doses is something important for us to consider, both because when we are fasting from like dusk to dawn, people don't want to take their medications, they don't want to break their fast. And being able to like work within the patient's schedule and needs is something important. Fasting is something really important to Muslims and a lot of them at times. Can you go to the next slide, Riad? Okay. Would someone like to maybe like step up and talk a little bit more about why they chose one of their answers? I think the majority of people did end up choosing all of the above, and that was what we intended the answer to be, because medication timing and doses, as you can see here, is something important. And as healthcare providers, we can think about adjusting the medication, the time of medications, adjusting the type of medications, and adjusting the, sorry, there's like a message there. But we can think about these things as well as we can think about diet and hydration, as well as the importance of fasting to Muslims. Do you want to move on to the next slide, Riad? And one of the things we wanted to expand a little bit more upon is that fasting is not required at all when it becomes a source of harm to adult. It is a thing we do additionally. So when people are traveling, if they're weak, if they're pregnant, if they're lactating or menstruating, they generally will not fast. Muslims often do ask healthcare providers for advice about like the safety of fasting or how they should go about handling their chronic conditions or not so chronic conditions within that time period. And I think as healthcare providers, we need to consider the importance of Ramadan to Muslims, as well as how we can adjust what we need from the patient to make it something viable that they can do. And that can come in many forms. That can come in listening to the patient, understanding where they're coming from, knowing what their priorities are, and also trying to adjust to meet their needs. A lot of these conversations occur with patients who have chronic medical conditions or are taking medications for chronic conditions. And just speaking from like my personal experience, I've known people who've gone to physicians and been like, I want to fast during this time, but the physician wasn't able or willing to like alter their medication or work with them. And they ended up just like not taking their medicine. And that is harmful for both them a lot, but also something that we should work to address with time. We also wanted to expand that like lifestyle changes during Ramadan can be different for various people. There's changes in diet and hydration that we all just need to keep in mind. And we can move on to the next question. All right, so a Muslim patient of mine wants to fast for Ramadan. Regarding vaccines, what should I be aware of? I'm going to pass this on to Riad. It's been something we've been thinking about and talking about a lot at Shifa.
Yeah, so as Khadija was mentioning, this is one of the discussions that a lot of patients come into clinic have. They'll ask, hey, I have my first dose. This was maybe last month. My second dose is scheduled during Ramadan. I'm going to be fasting. Am I allowed to do that? And so this is something that is particularly important right now, just because we want to make sure that people do have access to the COVID-19 vaccine when it is their turn, and not to delay that. If there is someone that's potentially misinformed or believes that they don't want to get the vaccine, they would potentially be waiting 1 month. Because as we mentioned, if they are fasting from dawn to dusk, they would start their fast at about 4:40 a.m. and break their fast at 8 p.m. And that might be somewhat difficult to find a vaccination center that works with those hours. So these are just some things to keep in mind. So I'll go ahead and ask the group if anyone wants to kind of think about what are some things, if you're going to get vaccinated, particularly against COVID, what are some things that if you can't eat or drink during the day that you would have to keep in mind for the following day?
Feel free to go ahead and like put your thoughts in the chat as well.
Yeah, so I have someone messaging me saying side effects. I have another person messaging me privately saying no food, no water. So these are some things that we would want to keep in mind. I'm gonna go ahead and continue on to the next slide and we'll just discuss that a little bit further. Okay, as we mentioned, it is a pretty big discussion right now, and this is a worldwide discussion that a lot of people were having. And again, as we vaccinate more patients at Shifa Clinic and as many other facilities around the area begin to vaccinate people, especially because the vaccine is, everyone's eligible for the vaccine if they're 16 and over, we're reaching out to this very large demographic of people all across America, particularly in California as well too. And so we want to make sure, what are the things that we understand regarding vaccines and what are ways that we can respect someone if they are fasting and observing Ramadan. So the general consensus among Muslim scholars is that vaccines are okay, they're thereby allowed. And that goes back to the notion of when we fast, we abstain from food and water and anything that provides nutrition. So the COVID-19 vaccine is more so protection against an infection. And so it doesn't provide a form of nutrition, and it's ultimately protecting you from a potential illness that you would have. And then secondly, because we talked about faith and ultimately some of the important things that we as Muslims regard highly would be the preservation of life. And so as Khadija mentioned earlier, when you fast, you want to make sure that you are obeying and serving God. But there are times where if someone can't fast, if someone's sick, if someone is going through a particular experience, if they're hospitalized, they're not obligated to fast during that time. And again, it goes back to the notion of the preservation of life is paramount in Islam. Secondly, as part of the discussion that we mentioned, side effects can be pretty challenging if you can't eat or drink or take medicines during that time. And if someone's fasting and it's the day after they got their COVID-19 vaccine and they have a headache or they have body aches, they might try to muscle through and just say, let me wait until sunset to take a Tylenol. And so these are things that people that we know from clinic and people that we've heard anecdotally that they thought about in terms of getting vaccinated, and it was time to get vaccinated during Ramadan. Again, keeping in mind they can't take a Tylenol either, so or an Advil or something like that. And then finally, if the side effects are overwhelming, and there's ultimately, you know, large heavy amount of fatigue or rigors, high fever, or if they do unfortunately experience like an adverse effect, these are things that would warrant breaking up the fast. And many times, if someone is traveling or if someone cannot fast for whatever reason, they're allowed to make up their fast after Ramadan. And that's a discussion that we'll continue to have as we continue in this presentation.
All right, so the next question for all of us to think about a little bit is, what are ways for those who are fasting to make their day go smoothly, both just like as a general person, but also someone working within the context of healthcare and all of the walking, running around, and all those things that we have to do. Feel free to either like unmute yourself and talk about it a little bit, or add it to the chat, or message me directly if you feel more comfortable with that.
Well, I wish we could sleep through the day. But I think one of the hardest things for me is kind of as a working mom, is that, you know, there's just very little rest. I think even with especially with little kids running around and their energy levels. And so I think one thing that I try to do is to make sure that I have some time where I can just go into my room, and even if I can't take a nap, just to rest, you know, to maintain my energy levels for the day, and then, you know, right when it's time to sleep, to make sure that I'm getting enough rest at night, especially with kind of the altered sleep schedule during Ramadan. So just preserving energy where possible, letting the kids, you know, do a little bit more, maybe do a little bit more, and me trying to pay a little less attention so I don't lose my mind.
Just being aware of your energy levels and being there for yourself in a lot of ways.
Exactly.
Cognizant of what you need.
I think another one I do is wean off caffeine well in advance of the beginning of Ramadan.
So that you don't have those headaches in the morning a little bit. Anything else that anyone wants to bring up, or they think? I mean, even if you've never fasted, it is like, feel free to chime in and let us know what you think.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Farah. I just wanted to say hello and thank you so much for setting up this forum. I recognize a few of you from Shifa, but just wanted to give my 2 cents on this. So I think, at least for me, some strategies that have made fasting bearable and really enjoyable, to be honest, have been, I think, similar to what Koban mentioned, opportunities to take like micro naps, which I know can be hard for many of us with a packed schedule, but I think even a 20-minute nap here and there has made a difference. Access to air conditioning, I'm just so grateful, to be honest, for like things that seem so basic, yet I think are so paramount with the weather changing. And I think just the flexibility and understanding of my colleagues with respect to the fact that I am fasting, I think makes a huge difference as well.
Is there anything else that anyone wants to add? And thank you, Farah, by the way. It's great meeting you. All right, let's move on to the next slide then. I think a lot of people have sort of brought up things in our discussion that we put into the slide and we thought about prematurely, but one of the first things I think that was the hardest for me is not remembering to drink water during Ramadan, because you can really only drink it in that time period where you're not necessarily used to eat. So I think something going forward that I want to work on is really remembering to hydrate and also eat well the morning of, and that's something you learn the more you fast and the more you go through this process. Also, as Dr. Lee said, tapering off caffeine, it helps a lot with those like morning headaches and just making the experience a little bit more manageable. You don't want to have to like deal with something else on top of it. And then one thing that I've like seen in the last couple of weeks that's been important for me is that when I am studying at school, and sometimes I end up staying past like iftar time, having a quick snack or having something to eat. I mean, you get used to not like thinking about that when you're in Ramadan, but like having that on the side, and something that might be even more so relevant when we go on to rotations and we have less control over our schedule, or we're working in every day in the hospital. Minimizing physical exertion, I think that's something you touched upon a little bit, Koban, and having your kids running around and you wanting to join them, but also like being aware of what you need and everything. And I think one of the things that we want to reiterate is that Ramadan's meant to be a good experience for all of us. It's meant to be a rewarding experience for all of us. It's not meant to burden us. And if it becomes a big detriment, then we need to be open to like having those conversations and seeking help, and also recognizing that if we do at any point need to end our fast, we can always make it up. And we don't want to be doing things that are pushing our limits too far, and we need to be aware of that. But yeah, next slide. Does anyone have anything they want to add on this? Okay, I'll pass it on to Dr. Lee, who's going to talk about a little bit about being a resident and a student.
Absolutely. So I volunteered to do this section because I've definitely been in this situation as a student and a resident and as an attending now. So a student or a resident on my team is fasting. What should I be aware of? So yeah, what do you guys think? I mean, you know, this if there's a student or a resident on your team that is, you know, seeming like they're a little bit more tired, or, you know, they're telling you that they're fasting, you know, things that I want you guys to think about is like how to be proactive, how to be empathetic to these members on your team. So any thoughts so far?
I'd like to give my perspective as well. Also, having been a student, a resident, and now an attending, I think some things from personal experience that I appreciated, because I think for me, it was often very hard to advocate for myself. I think as it is being a quiet person. But I think the few times that I was able to say like, oh, by the way, I'm fasting if it's okay. Can I have an opportunity to perhaps sit, which I think was really hard, especially during my surgical rotations as a student. But I think more so getting into internal medicine, which is what I do, I felt like it was a bit easier for me to achieve that balance of having opportunities where I can get out on time to be able to break my fast in a timely manner. I think some general things I think related to that maybe now on the flip end of things, now being an attending, if I maybe saw a student who said that they're fasting, or maybe just in general looked fatigued, I think definitely being vocal and checking in with students, residents, trainees in general of like, you know, you look a little bit tired, what's going on? And oftentimes just vocalizing can be enough for students and trainees to feel more comfortable to be able to say, oh, actually, you know, I'm fasting or I'm not feeling well. And then I think oftentimes taking the stance of curiosity can really help in terms of even just asking of, how can I best support you during this point in time? And I think the student or trainee can then open up to say like, actually, can I have chances maybe to, I don't know, not be in the OR as much during this month, but maybe go to clinic more, or maybe opportunities to take some breaks here and there. And I don't know, I feel like just making that platform to where it's easier for students to open up, and trainees, I think, can make the environment more optimal and help other people learn more about what fasting entails.
Yeah, these are great thoughts, Farah. I agree completely. And if there's no more thoughts, I'll just go on to the next slide. And sorry, there's this weird, okay. So anyway, like Farah said, and as you probably all know, I'm sure if some of you have probably tried fasting already, but it's pretty hard, especially if if Ramadan occurs during the hotter months or the summer months, if you're on the Northern Hemisphere. And you know, a very common thing that happens that I've experienced too is if a fasting individual is actually in the operating room. And it's very easy, especially if you're getting totally sucked into a case that's, you know, like you have this, sometimes a surgery is just really, what's the word? You lose track of time, if you will. And so it's easy to miss when the breaking of the fast happens. And so it's always good, like Farah said, to, you know, increase the lines of communication. And if you know that someone's fasting on your team and you're realizing that, oh, they've been here for a while, you know, retracting this liver for me as I sew and stuff. You know, maybe you should, you know, check in and say like, hey, is it time to break your fast? Are you feeling okay? And just give them that little extra bit of leeway for that. And then the other thing too is this is a month of introspection and prayer. So there's also Tarawih prayers that happen after the fast is broken and after the Maghrib prayer is prayed, and those prayers often go pretty late. I know quite a few medical staff who actually do go to the Tarawih prayers, which go from like start at 9:30 p.m. and go all the way till 11 p.m., sometimes midnight. So this month is a time where people do like to go to the masjid or to the mosque and engage in those prayers. So it's a pretty long day for them. But personally, I've not had the opportunity to do Tarawih prayers when I was a resident or a student, just because it's been so busy. But yeah, I think having that empathy, having the communication with that individual who's fasting, that makes a huge difference. Why don't we go on to the next slide? Yeah, and so this is a kind of the converse question, which is I'm fasting for Ramadan and I am about to start a hard rotation. What should I consider? I think Farah has already, mentioned a lot of these things from a personal note. Well, I don't know. Let's just let the audience kind of chime in. What do you think for those who are fasting, or for those who can empathize and think about what it would be like? What do you think are important things to consider if you're about to fast and about to start like a rotation on transplant or something?
I think one of the things that come to mind as a person who might be in this position in a year or two is whether I should talk to people about them or like tell my team, or whether it's something that I'm better off just keeping to myself because it's more so personal. Like in an ideal world, maybe it'd be better to talk to the team, but you also don't want to be treated differently or given less or like anything like that. And just the balance between those two things, I think it's something that can be challenging and hard.
Yeah, that's a great point, Khadija. I definitely, in my first few Ramadans as a student, I definitely didn't tell many people I was fasting because it just seems so, on the very outset, if you don't understand why we're celebrating this holiday, it may not make a lot of sense to some people. But as I learned going through, I think it's very important for me at least, to express, what I'm doing, so that people have knowledge of what I'm going through in case something happens and things like that. But that's a great point. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really, really important point, Khadija. And would just say, like from my experience, like I've, again, as not necessarily in the medical field, but as again as a working staff member and at UC Davis Health, I think the times where I have been able to communicate and share my experience with my team, and as I've grown and been able to communicate better and find more opportunities to, or more spaces where I feel, like I can share those thoughts and feel safe to talk about my personal experiences in that way. I've received more of kind of that empathy and support from my team, which is really helpful. It's just encouraging, and it sort of helps you get through your day when or when you feel like others are caring a little bit. So when I did share it, like at a staff meeting, for example, in one department that I was working in, my our supervisor decided to shift our late afternoon meetings, which were like at 4 or 5 o'clock, our kind of staff huddles, to earlier in the day, which was super helpful because you're just kind of worn out by the end of the day. So I think, not just sharing your experience, but just educating your team members on, what Ramadan is, what it means to be fasting, can go a long way, not just for yourself, but I think others, that those folks end up interacting with on other teams and, medical students and so on. So it is hard, I think, to share those experiences, but I think that communication piece can be really, really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Let's go on to the next slide then. Right. So, things are important points are that, whoever's fasting, you know, you have a right to break your fast. You have a right to fast to begin with, and it's, you know, it's your you know, it's your right to do that. But at the same time, you do have a responsibility to carry out your work and duties as a team member. Like Koban said, like, yeah, it'd be great if we could sleep through the whole day, you know, as we fast, and then, you know, be night owls and, you know, do everything at night when we can eat and drink and everything. But that kind of defeats the purpose of the holiday. But I think, if anything, I've learned how important, you know, sustenance is, not only on a physical level, but on a spiritual level, is how important those things are as we actually carry out responsibilities. So if anything, it makes me kind of take pride in my work more, and appreciate kind of the opportunities that we have to do what we do, and the energy it takes to do all these things, because you don't really appreciate that until you start not being able to eat and drink as much. The other thing that's important is the timing of when to let your team know about your fasting. Like we talked about before, some people may feel comfortable bringing it up. Some people may not feel comfortable. And, you know, there's no right answer. But I think the general sense, though, I think, is increasing lines of communication amongst your team is just so much more effective in bringing out, like we've been saying, empathy, and bringing out understanding, and kind of just increasing the amount of awareness of what other team members are doing, and being able to step up if someone is kind of you know, needs help because they're fasting and they're physically feeling some effects of it that are kind of detrimental, then, you know, recognizing that problem, and just being, you know, culturally aware and things like that. And then finally, think about things that you may be doing on your rotation during Ramadan. So, you know, planning preemptively, like packing a snack if you know you're going to be in on a long case, or hydrating well, and then you know, being comfortable also telling members of the surgical team, for example, that, you know, you need to step out for 5 minutes to just take a break. So just things that seem pretty obvious, but I think for the fasting person, sometimes we don't take the time to actually plan out our day as carefully, especially in the medical field, when, you know, patients take priority on most everything. So next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. So I want to say, you know, thanks again to Koban and to all of the folks here, and Khadija and Riad for organizing this awesome presentation. And at this point, we can take any questions or thoughts.
I just wanted to briefly add for the students in terms of the concern regarding, I guess, self-advocacy when it comes to rotations, or anything in particular related to Ramadan. I think like the academic coach for each of you can be a huge leverage point to help with advocacy. And so myself and like 16 of us are academic coaches for each of you. And I think that can be a safe space for each of you to potentially strategize what would be good ways to approach, whether it's your team attending or the IOR. So this way you don't feel that you have to go about this alone. So I wanted to offer that to each of you as well.
Cool.
And feel free to just unmute yourself and ask any questions or any thoughts or comments, and then or you could just put them in to the chat as well.
And then, you know, if you need more time, we do have one little, yeah, exactly, other a section where we can share some pretty interesting personal experiences. I have one that's pretty short, but pretty cool though. I think this was when I was a resident in general surgery, and I was fasting Ramadan. I think this was during during one of the summer Ramadans, and we were doing a pretty long case. I think we were going in on like 18 or 16 or 18 hours on this case, and it was almost time to break the fast. And I didn't even think about it. We just kept on going. And thankfully, I had been sharing with my co-resident about Ramadan and how I'm actually practicing it. And he's pretty intrigued by it because I'm this like Chinese guy, and he didn't really realize how many Chinese Muslims there are. But he ends up being the one on that night to actually nudge me and say, "Hey, Andrew, like, shouldn't you be breaking your fast already?" And then I'm like, "Oh yeah, you're right. Thanks for reminding me." So it just shows you that for me was like proof that it's so much more enlightening for everyone and helpful to you as well when you share what you do as a Muslim. And like, for example, going through Ramadan, when you share with your teammates kind of what you do and what you're going through, because you're not, you're going to have those times when you forget. You're going to have those times when you will need someone to remind you about, things like that, for example. And so we both benefited, right? He reminded me to break my fast, and now he understands a little bit more what Ramadan is, and is much all the more informed about it. So that was one cool story, and I'm really good friends with him even now. So he's always like texting me Happy Ramadan when it's time and stuff. So it's a good story.
And to add on that a little bit in like Arabic or in how we communicate with one another, instead of saying, we say like Ramadan Mubarak, which translates to like Happy Ramadan. And this week, I think 2 weeks ago, I had a classmate of mine who I hadn't spoken to very much just text me out of the blue Ramadan Mubarak, and like she knew what it meant, and she knew how to say it like fully the way I grew up. I think that was just so touching and impactful, because it makes you feel seen, it makes you feel heard, and it makes you feel like these things that are really important to you are things you can share with the full group and are things you can discuss with people. So just it means a lot when people reach out and say Ramadan Mubarak, or just even acknowledge what we're going through. And one of the things I wanted to expand upon, I felt like in this presentation we talked a lot about like the practical aspects of like Ramadan and being in healthcare, and we didn't touch so much on like why we choose to fast on Ramadan or why it is so important to us. And we've briefly mentioned like how it's a month of like introspection and like growth for us. But like at least for me, fasting from like dusk to dawn and not having food and not having water like really helps me reflect on a lot of decisions I make and a lot of the reasons why I do things, and all of the privilege and opportunity that I have. And I think it is a source of drive for me to like move forward and continue working and continue returning to those who might not necessarily have all of those things. And I think just in the practice of fasting, but also in the importance of like reflection and prayer, you grow as an individual and you learn more about yourself, and it is like it's a really impactful month for a lot of us. I don't know if you have any personal experiences you want to expand upon, Riad.
I think just again, going off what Khadija and Dr. Lee were talking about in terms of introspection and of prayer. As we all know, when COVID hit last year, the mosques shut down. And so there was no gathering at the mosques, there was no prayer. And, from our own community, there's people that we knew and loved that unfortunately have passed, or people that have passed for other reasons. And so oftentimes when you go visit a mosque, when you go see something, people always talk about, I can't wait for Ramadan to come. I can't wait for the nightly prayers that Dr. Lee was talking about, that go from 9:30 to 11 o'clock at night. And so these are things that we look forward to throughout the year. And I guess, through my studying and through, doing extracurriculars, for the first half or the first 2/3 of Ramadan, I made time to like go to the mosque, pray. And so it's like outside, it's like much safer. And it's been 2 years since we've done it, because the last time we did it was 2019, and we didn't have the opportunity to do it last year. So I guess this year it involved a lot more reflection in that regard, and it makes me more grateful. And I guess it provides much more humility in terms of things that are in my control, out of my control, and really bolsters my faith. And it's just an experience that that I love experiencing ultimately.
Well, thanks everyone for coming in. Any concluding thoughts, Megan or Sunny, on future events? I think you guys have some other events coming up, don't you?
Yes, we do. Thanks so much, Dr. Lee. And if I may share my screen to share information about an upcoming event that we have. So next, excuse me, the day of the week is wrong. That's next Thursday, May 13th, not Tuesday, May 13th. We are going to be presenting a event in partnership with the East Davis Health Asian Pacific American System-Wide Alliance. The presentation is titled Mental Health and Immigration in the AAPI Community, and that will be featuring JR Kuo, who is a mental health speaker, trainer, and coach, and founder of Coffee with JR. And we'll put the registration link into chat and welcome anyone who is interested in joining us. And also, when you're on the Book Project website, you'll be able to find information about our final event in the series, which will be happening later in May as well.
Hey, great. Awesome. Thank you, Megan. That sounds really cool. I guess we'll just end it there then. Thank you all for coming. Take care and have a blessed day.